Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are glad to have our viewers with us, supporting us as always. Jessica, what are we talking about?
Well, former President Donald Trump said Vice President Kamala Harris, quote, turned black during a combative live interview Wednesday at the National Association of Black Journalists convention. Let's watch.
Some of your own supporters, including Republicans on Capitol Hill, have labeled Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the first Black and Asian American woman to serve as vice president and be on a major party ticket, as a DEI hire. Is that acceptable language to you? And will you tell those Republicans and those supporters to stop it?
How do you define DEI? Go ahead. How do you define
diversity, equity, inclusion?
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Is that what your definition?
That is
give me a
literally
definition
the words
then. Would you give me a definition
DEI.
of that? Give me a definition of
Sir,
that.
I'm asking you a question,
No,
a
you
very
have to
direct
define
question.
it. Define it for me, if you would.
I just defined it, sir. Do you believe that Vice President Kamala Harris is only on the ticket because she is a black woman?
Well, I can say, no, I think it's maybe a little bit different. So I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much. And she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always identified as a black woman. She went to a historically black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear, sir, do you believe that
I think somebody should look into that too when you continue in a very hostile, nasty tone.
In another viral moment, Trump again clashed with ABC News correspondent Rachel Scott. Let's watch.
You have used words like animal and rabbit to describe black district attorneys. You've attacked black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort. So my question, sir, now that you are asking black supporters to vote for you, why should black voters trust you after you have used language like that?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever been asked a question in such a horrible manner. First question. You don't even say, hello, how are you? Are you with ABC? Because I think they're a fake news network, a terrible network. And I think it's disgraceful that I came here in good spirit. I love the black population of this country. I've done so much for the black population of this country.
Harris reacted to Trump's attacks while addressing members of the historically black sorority Sigma Gamma Rho in Houston.
Donald Trump spoke at the annual meeting of the National Association of Black Journalists. And it was the same old show. The divisiveness and the disrespect. And let me just say, the American people deserve better.
Meanwhile, MSNBC's Joy Reid had a message for the president of the NABJ.
Donald Trump showed up at the convention for exactly 3 reasons. 1, to try to dispel the notion that he's scared to debate a black woman, a presumption one can draw from his refusal to commit to debating VP Harris, who, again, for those in the back, is a black and Asian woman.
Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, seemingly doubled down on Trump's attacks, saying this at an Arizona rally yesterday.
This week, look up the clip. She went down to Georgia and started talking with a fake Southern accent. I'm serious. Now, what the hell was that all about? Kamala Harris grew up in Canada. They don't talk like that in Vancouver or Quebec or wherever she came from.
So I think it's a bit ridiculous to say that she's only recently claimed her black heritage. She was the president of the Black Students Law Association in the 1980s. She was an Kappa Alpha, AKA sorority, which is the first intercollegiate African-American sorority. We had a chapter at my school that was kind of underground. It was actually really cool. We weren't supposed to have any Greek life at Wells. There was a secret underground Alpha Kappa Alpha chapter. That's a mouthful. But the AKA sorority is huge, and it's a black sorority. She was not hiding her heritage. She was not hiding her race and saying she's only Indian. It's a ridiculous claim.
Yeah, she's biracial. She's black and Indian. I don't know what we're arguing about here. That seems fine. I don't know. I don't really think Trump or Republicans benefit by trying to parse at which point she presented more predominantly as one or the other. Obviously, you can, lean into one side more than the other depending on the people you're around or what. Like, it's not really worth discussing. I will say, I think it was a good thing that Trump went there. I'm glad the association invited him to speak. And for people who think that was, for liberals or progressives who think Trump's behavior there, the things he said were so disqualifying, shouldn't you be happy that the association gave him that opportunity to speak? And if you think it went badly, shouldn't you be excited that he, exposed himself to this community, this professional organization, as not worthy of your vote, if you think that's what happened? And yet Joy Reid type people are still gonna be like, oh, it was so wrong to ever extend this invitation, to ever hear from a different perspective. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's like I said yesterday, that him going and arguing and being combative with whoever's asking the questions would be a mistake, did that, and he could say something that makes him look stupid, did that. I genuinely think that he is scrambling, that he is saying increasingly unhinged things.
I don't know about
maybe
that.
Because he's losing ground. What do you think?
I think he fielded that question about the DEI nature of Kamala Harris's selection perfectly fine. He's like, well, what do you mean by that? What are you saying? And he made the person asking the question be a little bit more specific, that do you think she was picked for that position just because of her race and gender? At which point he could have said, well, yes, because we know that she was, because Joe Biden promised to pick his VP based on race and gender. He made that explicit commitment, and that is why he picked her. That's not to say that she isn't qualified or that she's nothing apart from her race and gender, just that race and gender was a significant factor in why she was selected.
But that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to him questioning her race as being black. And him lying and saying she didn't claim her black heritage. Do you think that's him being unhinged because he's scrambling? Because Kamala's gaining ground?
I don't think it's a helpful line of inquiry for Trump to make some. I don't think that's why.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very quintessentially Trump.
You think that was
why
like
do I think
calm,
he said
cool,
it? I don't
collected
know.
Trump?
I'm not inside Trump's head. Trump said. I mean, if you listen, you could hear the same thing I could hear, which is the crowd laughing hysterically. Trump is an entertainer.
Do you think those were laughs that were like, Trump is funny? Those were laughs. I will say that
Trump says some wild stuff to entertain a crowd that's fundamental to who he is.
Those were not laughs as I'm having a good time, this is very funny. Those were laughs as in I'm laughing at this man because I can't believe he said here and brought this mess and said this crazy thing to all of us. That's the laugh I heard. I mean,
again, he was asked to discuss. The people asking the questions made an issue about Kamala Harris's race, ethnic identity, and so he got into that because that's what he was asked about.
He was asked about his track record with black journalists.
Right. They said specifically that you and again it was that you call, how dare you call a journalist who happens to be a black woman a loser or criticize her reporting? Well, we can't. Again, there's no evidence that he criticized those people specifically because they were black or they were women. It was because he didn't like what they had to say.
Well,
he's also criticized journalists who are white men and journalists who are Asian and journalists who are every other type of demographic if they're anti-Trump, which so many of them are.
Well, here's what I'll say, is that two white guys like Donald Trump and J.D. Vance saying what they're saying, running against a black woman, questioning her racial identity.
It's illegal to run against a black woman? They should just give up. They should,
It's not illegal to run against a black woman, but to run against a black woman and make the campaign about whether or not she's black is ridiculous and could cost them the election. And it's making them look very stupid.
They're not making the campaign about that. The campaign is about the issues. It's about her policies. It's about her support for
that's not what we heard.
Environmental policy positions that will
Vance was not making policy
harm the economies in Pennsylvania and Michigan.
Well, I think
that's what the election's about.
even making this statement. He could have said something about policy. He didn't. Kamala
He
Harris
should pivot
could
to
have fought
policy all the
back.
time.
And instead she said, the American people deserve better, which I think was a very good response. We deserve better than this race being made about her race. We deserve a race that is on policy. And that's what Kamala Harris has been talking
Who's
about.
making about nobody?
She
Who's
talked
making about a race?
race.
The Harris campaign is holding white only and Asian only and black only affinity group rallies for Harris, or her top
campaign is
supporters
not
are.
holding.
They're making about race.
Robbie,
Race
you have
is
to be
the progressives are
careful,
obsessed
because
with race. That's all they care about.
By saying that, you're accusing the Kamala Harris campaign of violating FEC
Right,
regulations.
her supporters, her
It's
media
her supporters.
backers.
It's not her campaign. It's no one affiliated with the official Harris campaign. It's people organizing this among themselves.
The media and liberal, progressive, activist class wants this to be all about race because they're obsessed with race.
No, absolutely not.
they
Donald
are.
Trump questioned whether or not Kamala Harris is actually black. And then J.D. Vance doubled down and talked about it at a rally.
No, what J.D. Vance said is that she was speaking, I haven't heard the clip, I don't know if this is the case, but this is something that political figures do all the time. The code switching, the altering the cadence of your voice. Hillary Clinton used to do this all the time. It's not even controversial to say this. Like she would try to come across as more folksy and more Southern, depending on the audience. There's evidence of that happening all the time. I'm not even saying it's a specifically Democratic thing. Republicans play up their folksiness, etc. in the South. It's a common political tactic. It's not at all unique to her. What he was saying is that he was accusing her of doing that same thing.
Yeah, I've seen
That's not a ridiculous. That's not a racial.
happen.
That's not a ridiculous. We know that happens.
Right, and if you ask any black person about code switching, they'll say, of course we do that. And if Kamala Harris gets in front of a crowd of black people and feels comfortable talking how she did with the people she grew up with, that's fine. When I go back to New York and I talk with a New York accent and I'm around my family, and it's a different way of talking than I had to talk at Brown University to be accepted.
When I'm back in the Midwest, I sound a little bit more Midwestern after a week.
That's what people have to do. Some people have to code switch all day long at work all day. And so seeing Kamala Harris code switch, it's very different from seeing someone like Hillary Clinton, who's never had to be anyone other than elitist who went to Yale, code switch and try and act folksy. So Kamala
Our political
Harris,
figures, all of them, are trying to manufacture.
It's fake when some people do it, I'll give you that. I don't think
fake when they all
Kamala
do
Harris was being fake. And I think questioning her heritage and her background and making that a part of what you're running on is a huge mistake, especially among black voters and voters in the South.
Okay, I think the race should have nothing to do with race. The campaign needs to have nothing to do
That
with
would
race.
be nice, but it's been made about race by Donald Trump. Right now, that's
do
why
not
we're
think it's been
talking
made about
race.
race
It's
by
because
Donald
of what
Trump.
he said, because he questioned her race. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this block. We wouldn't even be talking about this.
More Rising right after this.
Did the federal government violate First Amendment rights when it pressured social media companies to censor certain information? According to the Supreme Court, no. Earlier this year in May, the court dismissed the claims argued in Murphy v. Missouri that conservative speech is being censored. Fast forward to this week, Republican Senator Rand Paul released new legislation to counteract the court's decision.
In concert with Republican House members Harriet Hageman and Dan Bishop, Paul has co-sponsored the bill that aims to prevent federal government workers and contractors from using their positions to direct online platforms to censor First Amendment protected speech. Here to elaborate on that subject and a few others is the co-sponsor of the new legislation, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Thank you so much for coming back to Rising, Senator.
Thanks for having me.
So many of us were disappointed, I think, by the court's decision to say that what had gone on with federal agencies, everyone from the CDC to the FBI to the Department of Homeland Security, communicating with social media companies and pressuring them to engage in censorship. But the Supreme Court said ultimately that did not, according to them, strictly violate the First Amendment because it was plausibly voluntary, that kind of thing. What is the congressional remedy that you're considering?
You know, I'm not so sure the Supreme Court did say that. I think the Supreme Court decided this on standing, not on the merits. So I don't think there was an absolute statement by the Supreme Court that it's okay for the FBI and Homeland Security to meet with, harangue, and sort of use surrogates to censor speech. They ended up deciding this on standing and sent it back to the lower court. Now, they could have upheld the ruling, by the district judge and been more forceful with it, and that would have been a much better decision from my perspective. So we've done a couple things. For over a year, even before this court case came out, I've had legislation that forbids the FBI or any other part or department of government from meeting with to coerce anybody in the media, whether it's legacy media, internet media, whether it's social media, to meet with any of them to coerce taking down constitutionally protected speech. So that's one way of going about it. We also have a new bill we've introduced in the last week that gives the parties standing. So this is a complicated thing, but the Supreme Court often punts on difficult decisions. I don't know why they chose to take this case if they weren't going to rule on the merits, but standing is something that can also be legislated. So we have legislation that, if passed, would actually give the individual standing to bring this lawsuit. So it's not over, and we will continue with this fight. A lot of what we know, though, is because Elon Musk spent $44 billion on Twitter. In fact, I loved his comment when he says, I didn't spend $44 billion on Twitter. I spent $44 billion to protect free speech, and thank goodness he did.
Speaking of free speech, you opposed the Kids Online Safety Act bill, which passed the Senate this week, although I now understand that the House Republicans are not interested in pursuing it, which me and many other civil libertarians like yourself were very worried about how this bill would harm online speech. Can you talk about why you opposed that bill?
You know, beware of any kind of bill that has a benign sounding name that sounds like, how could you be against motherhood, American Pie, and children's online safety? But what they do is they create a new council, and this new council's mission, the Children Online Safety Council, their mission will be to protect kids from things that might cause anxiety, eating disorder, exposure to gambling, or alcohol, amongst other things. The problem is it is vague and sets out these missions, but doesn't say exactly what will happen. So I have some questions. What if you're a 15-year-old girl and you're pregnant, and you're probably anxious for that reason alone, but now you go online and you see a pregnancy center that says they'll give you a free delivery, they'll help you with adoption, or if you want to take care of the child, they'll tell you, but that makes you anxious. Or on the contrary, what if you actually are seeking an abortion and it makes you anxious to hear, one side or the other, or you don't want an abortion, you don't want to hear from reproductive health or the people doing abortions. You can see how content would be stifled according to anxiety. Climate change. Greta Thunberg, the girl with the mental illness from Europe that's always talking about the world is ending. Climate alarmism. If she went on my website, I'm sure she would be anxious because I don't think the world is ending and I think it's a bunch of malarkey. And so, but am I not allowed to say that? Are teenagers not going to be allowed to listen to things that people who are opposed to say? A Harvard study said 65% of young people are laying awake and their daily routine is interrupted from climate anxiety. Eating disorders. Are we going to let skinny models on Sports Illustrated anymore? Is everybody going to be obese that we take a picture of? So there's all kinds of things that cause anxiety, and they're not to be laughed at. I mean, eating disorders are serious. Suicide is serious. But, FanDuel has ads all over PGA. You can't watch PGA, and I watch PGA, and I see these ads. But my kid, who's 12 years old, is going to be allowed to watch PGA on TV, but not on Facebook because of this. I mean, it's insane. Super Bowl. There's nothing but beer ads on the Super Bowl. Every kid in the world can watch the Super Bowl on TV, but they can't watch it on Facebook or Hulu or any other kind of streaming. So it really sets up disparate rules for disparate forms of entertainment or of exposure of how you get your entertainment. But kids tend to get it online. It also changed the standard. The standard used to be you need to get kids to sign up and say how old they are, and that you have to have a reason for doing that. Now they change it from you should have known. So it's not that you knew the kid was 12 when you let him see gambling ads. You should have known he was 12. It's incumbent upon you to know, and you should have known. It's a virtually impossible standard. But you can also see how, let's say I have a website, and I'm worried that they're going to find me because a 12-year-old saw something on climate alarmism, or someone who doesn't believe in climate alarmism. Well, maybe I just don't want to put that content up for adults either, because it's too hard to figure out the difference between adults and kids. It's going to cost me a bunch of money and they've empowered state attorney generals to sue me. So maybe I don't put it up at all. So you can see how this stifles not only speech for children, but it may well stifle speech for adults as well.
Now, Senator Paul, when I use social media, I oftentimes am posting content that is political in nature. A lot of users, myself included, have experienced this community guidelines violation at Instagram or TikTok, and there's no real explanation as to how the rules and the community guidelines have been violated, and oftentimes they'll never get an explanation because it's simply used to quiet content or get rid of content that is against the political opinions of the board of directors, the trustees, or whoever's running the app. This is concerning in a direction of this is all we have in terms of a public square is social media in many ways these days. But at the same time, these are private companies. So is there an argument here perhaps that it's a form of consumer protection, that I agree to the rules, I agree to the community guidelines, but if I didn't violate them, my content should be able to be viewed by other users? Is there an angle to this that it can be framed as consumer protection to protect free speech on social media websites?
The First Amendment doesn't apply to private companies in any way. The First Amendment only applies to the government. So we can be mad. I'm mad. I'm mad at YouTube for taking down a speech where I said cloth masks don't work, and so I quit using them. I'm on Rumble, and I don't use YouTube. And I didn't destroy YouTube in one fell swoop, but other people don't like it. Google is now suppressing, and they have some bizarre, convoluted reason for suppressing the Trump assassination and the iconic photo of him rising up defiant. And, don't like Google, use a different search engine. Realize that if you use Google as your search engine and you want to know the truth about whether a 15-year-old healthy kid has a higher chance or risk from the vaccine than they have from the disease of COVID, you won't find any articles in the first million articles because everything is government propaganda. That's all they'll put up there. They just decided that anybody's opinion other than the CDC was not going to get on the search engine. And so this is a real problem, but the marketplace takes care of this. You're right, it affects consumers, but the consumer protects the consumers. We're not idiots, and we have many choices. Your show is a choice. It gives alternative, more libertarian viewpoint, I think. But there are plenty of choices. We just need to not feel like the government has to take care of us, whether it's our kids or our viewpoint. Go look for it somewhere else. There's actually more venues for opinion now than there's ever been. When I was a kid, there were 3 networks. They were all liberal, and that was it. There was no cable news, there was no internet news, there was no really even talk radio at that point. So I think we have a lot of venues, and we should complain, we should boycott, we should move along. And the one thing we should do through government is prevent government from participating in that censorship.
One more question for you, Senator, before we let you go on an entirely different subject. You were able to question the acting director of the Secret Service this week. So many people, us included, people who watch our show, are so frustrated by the answers we've gotten from top law enforcement, or lack thereof, of answers about what went wrong during the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, a figure who was known to law enforcement, who interacted with and was seen by law enforcement, able to take a shot and wound the president, the former president of the United States. What do you make of the investigation so far?
I was encouraged by his admission that grave mistakes were made, that not guarding the rooftop was indefensible. I was encouraged by that. I was encouraged by the fact that he said there will be disciplinary hearings. But later in the hearing, I was a little discouraged to see him pointing fingers at local police, saying they were supposed to guard that building. The local police have been interviewed. We've interviewed. My staff has met with them personally, and they say they weren't told to guard that rooftop. They were specifically told what windows to stand in and what building to be in, and they warned the Secret Service that rooftop needed to be guarded, and the Secret Service said they would take care of it. But the bottom line, even if it's a he said, she said on who should have been on the roof, when the roof was empty, the person in charge is the Secret Service. So if you're the Secret Service agent in charge and you're walking the grounds and you look up and say, oh my goodness, that building's just right over there in direct line of sight of the president, we can't have that. Someone needs to get up on the roof. That's the job of whoever's in charge. And if you didn't make that decision, you can't be in charge anymore. And so I don't have any animus towards the person. I don't know who they are. But whoever made that decision, whoever was in charge, can't do this again. That's why I asked the acting director You know, what if the person in charge of Butler County were in charge of the Democrat National Convention next week? Most of us wouldn't be comfortable with that. And so he reassured me that person wouldn't be in charge. But later on, he said, well, we don't want to reveal who the person is because they're still actively in charge of other security details. And it's like, oh, my goodness, they need to be on a desk job. They need to be somewhere else, but not in charge. It was inexcusable that they saw a suspect for 90 minutes and they allowed the program to go on. Even if you discount 90 minutes worth of photographs, when you get to 6:06, people are saying, guy on a roof, guy on a roof. At 6:08, the police say, guy on a roof. They still haven't seen a gun, I don't believe, at this time. But at 6:08, guy on a roof. Is that not enough to stop the proceedings? You got 3 more minutes till the shots ring out. They say, well, interoperability, we couldn't hear from the local police because they're on a different channel. You could go to Best Buy with $1,000 and buy 20 different pagers for everybody. You know, maybe 100 pagers. I'm not sure, but for a small amount of money, you could in an afternoon at the local Best Buy get what they need to have broadcast. And there are, you know, have they not thought this through before? When you have like a red alert, like a button you push and everybody hears it on the speaker, red alert, possible gunman. Because even if you're at a point where you can't shoot them yet, you haven't seen the gun, you've got a guy on a roof and you haven't seen his gun yet. So you can't shoot him until you see a gun. But isn't it enough to say, Mr. President, we're stopping the speech? You know, they knew enough to stop before the president even went out at 6:02, but they certainly knew enough at 6:08. But these are the decisions that the command leader makes. And if the command leader didn't make the decisions, like I say, it doesn't make them a bad person. Doesn't mean they should be punished criminally. It means they should never be in this position of authority again. That's the least that we can do.
Senator Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, Jessica, what's in your journal today?
This is Jess's journal. I thought you'd never ask. Robbie, so while many speculate that Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, will be Kamala Harris's running mate, others are busy having their hearts captured by Tim Walz. The Minnesota governor brings a different approach to politics than anyone I've seen in this country.
How are you going to build a water treatment plant in a town of 400 if you don't have a collective effort at it? So I have to tell you, they scream socialism. We just build roads and we build schools and we build prosperity into this. Their whole plan is to go backwards, to give tax cuts to the wealthy. And look, it was so surprising. You know, these super successful Donald Trump, who inherited $400 million and then proceeded to fail at everything. Middle America, you earn it, but you know what? You're not on your own. Neighbors help neighbors. And I will, this one bothers me. I heard you talking about punching back at the bullies. They see people less fortunate as scapegoats and you know, punchlines for their jokes. We see them as neighbors. And I said it with my mom. My dad dies when my little brother's young. We're teenagers. We get Social Security survivor benefits. I'm all for pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. We didn't have any boots. Social Security was the boots, and we pulled ourselves up, and we paid that back. And I think J.D. Vance gets none of that. You know, it's the aw shucks, I'm from here or whatever. So my hillbilly cousins did not go to Yale, but I'll tell you what they did. They contributed to our community, and they're proud of it.
Tim Walz also brings a new energy to the gun control debate. Here he is with Anderson Cooper.
That's what J.D. Vance's stick is, talking about guns. I guarantee you he can't shoot pheasants like I can. And that's a part of saying, but you know what? I guarantee I don't want weapons of war in classrooms, and there's no reason that you can't have reasonable restrictions around that without infringing on your Second Amendment. He's going in there throwing these things around that makes a difference. Democrats need to go into these places. I'm going to go in every Legion Hall I can go into and say, Vice President Harris will not cut your benefits. I sat in the VA committee for 12 years to increase those benefits with Republicans like Jeff Miller from Florida. This guy wants to cut them because it's in the 2025. We need to be bolder on that. We need to go out and say that.
His takes on veterans' benefits, on gun control, and building roads and schools are all part of his common sense approach to demanding, or rather defending, programs that people rely on. And Tim Walz is, I think, the antidote to a politics that's been overwhelmingly cultural and vibes-based. Our leaders need to be focused on delivering policy.
These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away. They want to be in your exam room. That's what it comes down to. And don't, get sugarcoating this. These are weird ideas. Listen to them speak. Listen how they talk about things. Listen to how your previous guests were right. Like you said, they've told them that they shouldn't talk about race. They can't help it It is built into their DNA because there is no plan. There's no healthcare plan. There's no healthcare plan. There's nothing to do on this. They want to take away our alliances and leave Russia to do whatever they want. Look, they are bad on foreign policy. They are bad on the environment. They certainly have no healthcare plan. And they keep talking about the middle class that, as I said, a robber baron real estate guy and a venture capitalist trying to tell us they understand who we are. They don't know who we are.
Tim Walz isn't just a good nighttime news guest. He's got the perspective of a regular guy from the Midwest. He's not a Wall Street, Silicon Valley, or DC politician.
Hey, Minnesota, Governor Walz here, out at the State Fair with my daughter.
Hope.
Every year we as a family do something old and something new. I get to pick something, a classic, the old mill ride, to do that. And then Hope gets to pick something new.
I think we're gonna go do the slingshot.
Which I don't know what it is, and they're keeping it from me. But then we're gonna go get some food, corn dog.
I'm vegetarian.
Turkey then. And
Turkey's
then,
meat.
Not in Minnesota, turkey's special. And we will go do some of those things and report back.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Yes! Oh my God! It keeps going.
Yes!
That was good. Good job, Dad.
Oh, thanks, Hope.
He can dress down and not look like he's cosplaying as a working class guy like so many other politicians do when they put on their casual clothes. He puts on camo and a ball cap and just looks like a regular guy. And there's a little wear and tear on his casual clothes, so you know he actually puts them on regularly. This is to say, Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party don't just need to move on from Trump. They need to move on from Biden and from Hillary. They need to ditch the establishment elites who not only ruin the vibes that Dems tend to run on, they quash any real policy change. And there's a reason Tim Walz was written off by the establishment from the start. Rahm Emanuel, who as chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee at the time, didn't think Walz could win. When he was asked about Walz, he said, no, he has no money. No nothing. And then he won with a grassroots campaign. And while his policies to feed kids in school and protect benefits earned him all kinds of backlash, it really makes you question why the politicians who fight for the little guy get a bad rep, while the ones who are friends with Wall Street executives in Silicon Valley are labeled good for the economy. The last time I checked, they both needed bailouts. The working class has never gotten a bailout. And while J.D. Vance calls them lazy, Tim Walz ushers in a new future and a new politics.
Good one Minnesota morning. 2.5 million people showed up last November and cast votes. They made a choice. They chose hope over fear. They chose inclusion over exclusion. They chose personal freedoms over totalitarian dictates from government. They chose science over conspiracy. Above all else, though, they chose action over gridlock. Time and time again, they said it's not hard to vote your conscience for what's good for your people. It's not about banking political capital for the next election. It's about burning political capital to improve lives. It will be proven no more effective members have ever sat in this chamber and did the work than this group you see right in front of you.
Harris is taking notes. She knows the rent is too damn high.
On day one, I will take on price gouging and bring down costs. We will ban more of those hidden fees and surprise late charges that banks and other companies use to pad their profits. We will take on corporate landlords and cap unfair rent increases. And we will take on Big Pharma to cap prescription drug costs for all Americans. Our plan will lower costs and save many middle-class families thousands of dollars a year.
In my opinion, Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania would be a step backwards, as most of the left is criticizing Trump over corporate tax cuts. Shapiro advocates for them. As the left defends investment in public schools so everyone can benefit, Shapiro has pushed school vouchers for private schools for the few. As Kamala is tested by progressives on Palestine and young people who demonstrated on college campuses for Palestine, Shapiro equated those protesters with KKK members. Tim Walz is the guy. Josh Shapiro is not our guy. So that's how I feel about it all, Robbie. That's what's on Jess's journal. I made a little Tim Walz picture, a little doodle.
I can see that you're a big fan.
It's really what's in my journal.
Look, I think he would be a perfectly adequate choice for Kamala Harris as a VP. My sense is that things are leaning in the direction of Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, because that's a really must-win state and would help Kamala compete in that state. He's extremely popular in Pennsylvania, even among Republicans. His favorability among Republicans is very high. So I think it's ultimately just going to be a political calculation. But Tim Walz is good at talking to the folks, good at talking to Republicans, and I don't agree with his policies, but he's a fine, well-spoken political choice for her.
Yeah, I think that this idea that the Dems seem to have, you're right, that if they pick Shapiro, they'll definitely win Pennsylvania. They've obviously seen some internal polling that shows there's some truth to picking a candidate from a state that makes them win. I do
That's about all the VP pick can do, really.
But I think that Tim Walz is someone who can speak to working class Pennsylvanians in a way that maybe Josh Shapiro can't. And I think that Josh Shapiro, as someone who grew up in a working class family, does have the vibe, to me, of a typical politician in a way that Tim Walz doesn't. And so, sure, Josh Shapiro might deliver you Pennsylvania, but will he hurt you in other states across Appalachia in the United States? Will he hurt you in North Carolina? Will he hurt you in Minnesota and the Midwest? And so I think Tim Walz is the kind of guy that can win Pennsylvania, even if he's not from there. Just because I think he speaks to what working class people want, which is a common sense approach to economics and someone they can trust who understands where they come from. And I think Tim Walz captures that in a way that no one else does. And I think Kamala Harris would be making a mistake to pick Shapiro over him, also because the youth like Tim Walz. We had Victoria Hammond on who mentioned Andy Bashir. He's kind of the compromise candidate at this point. It seems that most progressives are behind Tim Walz. And as you said yesterday as well, it's not just about casting ballots in November with the youth vote. These are a lot of the people who staff up campaigns, who are out knocking doors, who are posting on social media. You kind of need that manpower. And can Kamala Harris win without that? I'm not sure, and Josh Shapiro might cost it for her.
Well, Kamala Harris has said she will announce her VP pick, I think, by next Tuesday, and so we will probably know very soon in the coming days, maybe over the weekend, who it will be, whether it's Tim Walz or someone else. More Rising right after this.
Joe Rogan cannot fathom that people actually like Vice President Kamala Harris. Let's watch.
Everybody forever was like, Kamala Harris is the worst vice president. She's the least popular vice president of all time. And then in a moment in time, all of a sudden she's our solution. She's our hero. Everybody's with her. All these social media posts about her. Try Googling a negative story on her. You won't find one.
So,
ta-da!
Okay, you've got.
Rogan also made this prediction on the 2024 presidential election with his guest, cultural commentator Michael Malice.
She's going to win.
No, she's not.
She can win.
She absolutely can win. I do not think she's going to win because the more she talks, like in 2020, how bad do you have to be that you can't even make Iowa? She couldn't even compete with the mayor of South Bend.
I feel like we are in this very bizarre time where people are giving in to the in a way that I never suspected people would before. And this is one, they just want no Trump, no matter what, and they're willing to gaslight themselves. They think that, and by the way, I think Hillary could win. If Hillary jumped back in.
Rogan had this to say about the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump.
It's
I would
possible.
have thought that Trump getting shot would that's it, election's over. But it's they memory hold that so quick.
You would have thought Trump getting shot would have had 8 years of corporate journalists talking about hate speech causing violence to be let's take a step back. And that went for what, a week?
They did take a step back
for a
little
week,
bit.
For a week.
And then they went right back at him.
So they are right that Kamala Harris
is going to win.
Well, she could win. As Michael Malice says, she very much could win. They're right to recall that Vice President Kamala Harris was a uniquely unpopular figure. I just pulled up, this is a headline from Axios from June of 2023, a year ago. NBC News poll, Kamala Harris hits record low for VP net favorability. 49% of registered voters have a negative view of her. 32% have a positive view. This is her net negative rating of -17, lowest for a vice president in the history of its poll. So, we can't forget that for the most of the Biden presidency, she was known for being less popular than he was. That has turned around as of late, and she is benefiting from an incredible torrent of relentlessly positive media coverage that has elevated her favorability. And she's against a vulnerable candidate. Donald Trump is not particularly popular. He is very alienating to people outside his hardcore base, but Republicans have stuck by him, and so that's their guy. They're up against someone who did not have to compete in a primary process. Kamala was not committed to taking all sorts of damaging far-left opinions that don't even make far-left people happy, because far-left people are impossible to make happy. She didn't have to do any of that in the primary process. She was just substituted in at the last minute. So it's all to her benefit as a candidate. That's clearly happening. I'm not in denial about it. She absolutely could win this election. It's going to be close.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to point out Trump's favorability. He had a favorability rating in the 30s. It was as low as 28 before he was elected in 2016 in the months leading up to November. So even Kamala Harris's favorability being at 49%, it's still much higher than Trump's was, and he won the presidency. And so I think what we're seeing here with Kamala Harris is not that surprising to me. And it's also not that surprising to me that Joe Rogan doesn't have friends who liked her. And it's not surprising to me that Joe Rogan has no friends who like her right now. People live in silos. That's the America we live in. And I'm just not surprised by it coming from him. I know a lot of people that were skeptical on Kamala Harris, people who were not always Democrats, but people who like that she's talking about rent caps. People that like that she's offering a different path than Donald Trump did and a different path than Joe Biden did. And that while she has culture behind her, she's not running just on vibes like we saw Hillary Clinton run on. I think Hillary Clinton made some policy promises, but I think there was an overwhelming reliance on celebrity endorsements, having the rallies be riddled with gimmicks like Pokemon Go to the polls. I think it was a little bit cringe, and Kamala has something that's organic behind her in addition to some policy stances that really stand up to the elites in America.
I think it seems like the exact same thing. I mean, she has policies, while also, yes, she is an advocate of progressive policies that, some are popular, some are not. She is a part of the ruling administration in America for the last 4 years. She has to own what the Biden administration has done. If you trusted Trump more than Biden on the economy and on immigration and on other issues, there's no difference. Kamala Harris is a part of and responsible for all those exact same policies. And if she breaks with them, she breaks with them. Really, what she has to break with is her even further left past on energy and environmental issues, or she can not, or she can embrace them, and we'll see how that goes down.
I've seen a lot of people, and I think it's a strategy on the right, to make Kamala Harris own everything Biden did as vice president. I think especially Republicans with Trump and Pence can understand that the vice president's positions on political and policy issues can be very different, extremely different, I think some Trump supporters would say. So they know that a vice president and a president's political views are not the same, and they're trying to make Kamala Harris own Biden's views because they think that that's a winning strategy, to be like, she's basically the same as the last
Well,
guy.
if she doesn't own them,
she
can explain. She can explain then what she disagrees with Joe Biden on. She can come out and say, here are the things that happened under the Biden administration that I was not aware of and did not sign off on, and here's what I'll do differently. I'd love to hear that from her.
I think many people understand that what the president does is not what the vice president does, and they're letting her run as her own candidate, and she's going to tell us what policies she supports, as she did at her rally, where in Atlanta she talked about rent caps and rent control. We haven't heard what Donald Trump's going to do about the housing crisis in the United States of America. I don't know how he's going to bring rent down across the country. I would like to know that. We don't have that. We have that from Kamala, and she's only been running for a couple of weeks. And so I think the reason the right is scrambling and trying to equate her with Hillary Clinton is because they have no idea how to run against her. And they want her to be Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton lost. But it's fundamentally different. From the young people that are supporting her, they can tell you it's fundamentally different from Hillary Clinton. So as much as the right says it, they can't manifest it to be true.
Well, I don't know. It will be a competitive election. I have no doubt about that. Republicans have, now she's not even officially the candidate yet, so she is enjoying this honeymoon period and she's going to continue to enjoy fawning media coverage. We saw from the media for about a month what they can do when they're really being scrutinizing and critical of a candidate, as they were of Joe Biden from his debate performance until the day that he dropped out. Now that they've gone right back to, and I think they've revealed something about themselves because the American people saw that, wow, you really can do this. You can be skeptical, be critical. You can expose some underlying flaws in a candidate if you really set out to do it, as they've done with Trump for years and years and years. They're not going to do that for Kamala, and I wonder if people are waking up to that fact.
Well, Joe Biden was someone who had visible signs of cognitive decline, audible signs of cognitive decline.
That Kamala Harris helped cover up for months or years?
And so, sure, you can say that she's covering it up. She doesn't have to address his cognitive state. She doesn't have to speak on that if she doesn't want to. And of course, if she did, she might not get his endorsement as VP. And so one can understand many reasons for why she wouldn't have commented on that. But the media landscape completely changed. Of course, Kamala Harris isn't going to get as much criticism as someone who's an old man experiencing visible signs of cognitive decline who can't complete a sentence. Those are just two entirely different people. Of course, the media will treat them differently. Joe Biden was much worse, which is why the coverage was much worse.
More Rising right after this.
Mark Zuckerberg, who? Venezuela's thrice-elected president, Nicolas Maduro, is now the one challenging Elon Musk to a fight. After the Venezuelan election, in which both candidates claimed victory, Musk weighed in, posting a picture on X of a graph representing turnout, captioning, quote, "The people voted overwhelmingly for Edmundo Gonzalez." He called the election a major fraud and reposted, quote, "Venezuela's socialist dictator Maduro claims he won re-election, but leaked vote tallies show Maduro lost. The saying goes, you can vote your way into socialism, you might not be able to vote your way out."
Maduro caught wind of the tech tycoon's fiery criticisms and responded by calling Musk Venezuela's new arch nemesis, then challenged him to a fight on national TV.
Elon Musk, ¿quieres pelea? Vamos a darle, Elon Musk. Estoy listo. Soy hijo de Bolívar y de Chávez. No te tengo miedo, Elon Musk. Vamos a darnos, pues, donde quiera. Como decimos en Caracas, en los barrios. Si tú quieres, yo quiero, Elon Musk. Di dónde.
Musk accepted, posting, quote, "I'm coming for you, Maduro. I will carry you to Gitmo on a donkey." X is going wild. One user posted this meme captioning, quote, "My money is on Elon Musk. All these 2024 notable fights, Musk versus Zuckerberg, Trump versus Biden in golf, Musk versus Maduro." None of them happening, by the way. Here's one more meme of the pair in a Will Smith, Chris Rock moment. Okay. We have another challenge to fight someone from Elon Musk. The Musk-Zuckerberg fight didn't end up happening, which is a good thing for Musk, much as I'm a fan of what he's done with Twitter. Zuckerberg is like a robot who has trained in all sorts of martial arts and would be a difficult person to beat in a fight. The fight between Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and Musk, so I looked it up. Maduro is 61. He's an older man. Musk is in his early 50s. I don't know why they need to fight, but Maduro is a despicable, reprehensible tyrant, and so if he was beaten up, that would be fine, but it doesn't seem like a constructive way to resolve or improve the problems in Venezuela is fight me, bro, but whatever.
As much as I want to get into what's going on with Maduro and Musk, I can't get over that you said you like what he's done with Twitter. You log on to X and you're like, I love what you've done with the place. Elon, my DMs are all like, hi, want a video chat? I'm a hot girl in your area. The bots and the robots are horrible.
Well, that was always a problem.
And all of the people paying for blue check marks just to be at the top of the comment sections, it used to be the funniest comments, and now it's the worst comments just because they paid to be there. I'm not a fan. Anyway, I couldn't get over it. But Maduro and Elon Musk fighting, I want this one to actually happen. We know that Mark Zuckerberg does some kind of special classes for defense. Judo, is he a judo guy? He's one of those guys, various martial arts. He knows them. Musk, not so much. Musk not built for fighting. Why say lot word when few word do trick? I think that Maduro, Maduro is someone that looks like he can fight. And I just want to know.
More so than Musk?
Are we going to get a street fight or a cage match, though? Like, is this organized, or is Elon Musk going to pull up to Crocus on the PJ?
I mean, it's not going to happen. The
the
Zuckerberg-Musk one didn't happen either.
It's not going to happen. So Elon Musk is all words here.
Well, so is Nicolas Maduro. He's the head of state. He's not going to actually fight them. It's not going to happen.
I think he would.
I absolutely don't think so. He's not even willing to have he's so afraid of a challenge he didn't actually allow the country he runs to have a real election.
We don't know that.
Yes, we do.
We absolutely do.
We absolutely do. No. We will not be making excuses for authoritarian anti-democratic repression just because it happens to be left-leaning, which is what I know you're doing here. No. He stole the election. He is a tyrant. We all know it. Everybody knows it. People on the left don't want to admit it because it's only bad. Stealing elections is only bad when Donald Trump tries to do it. I know that's the case, but that's what happened.
Okay, I am waiting for more information to come out, as I do with any election, before I say for certain what has happened or not. Okay. Do I think it's likely he got 70% of the vote share? It's an alarming amount. We've seen sweeping elections in the United States before, but I'm going to wait for third parties to confirm what definitely happened on election day there.
Okay.
The country is in chaos. It's no doubt that he's someone that should not have run for as many cycles as he has. He's someone that should have let someone else take over. I could agree with all of those things.
Yes.
I'm definitely an advocate for term limits, but I'm not going to say how the country voted when I don't know for sure. I will say that I think Musk framing this as you can vote your way into socialism, but you can't vote your way out is rich. This is the guy who said we'll coup whoever we want in reference to Bolivia, which is a lithium-rich country, and he wants the lithium. This is also a guy from South Africa. I lived in South Africa for about half a year, and almost everyone I met who is someone like Elon Musk, someone who's coming from a family of people who are white South Africans who have lived there for generations. His family's moved around a lot, but there's a sense of racial disconnection that's present in South Africa that is more extreme than the United States. And the way Elon Musk talks about other countries, especially when those countries are people who are not white people, it's almost like he's entitled to the resources there because he feels like the people there don't have a right to self-determination. They don't deserve them. I'm greater than you, you are less than me. He's almost offended that the country of Bolivia is controlling their own resources. We'll coup whoever we want, as if he's entitled to the lithium under the ground in Bolivia just because he's, a billionaire? No, you're not entitled to other people's land or resources. I think him saying that you can vote your way into socialism, but you can't vote your way out is the same thing. He believes United States multinational corporations are entitled to the resources to free trade with the people of a country, even if they vote for someone who's explicitly said, we believe in different sort of handling of our natural resources. We don't believe US-based multinational corporations should come in and extract all of them. And so this belief that the uprising in Venezuela is not about democracy, but is instead about their economic views is a bad take. And, we've had experts on the show who have spoke to that as well just yesterday. Bernal from The Hill, who's a writer on Latin America, an expert on it, said to equate the uprising to people not believing in an economic system of socialism would be to not understand it, and that this is about democracy. It's about elections.
Well, those two things are very related because when socialist governments take hold, the first thing they do is suspend fair elections and lead to widespread deprivation of people's political rights. These things are fundamentally tied because in order to do the widespread society-wide transformational economic change that socialist revolutionary leaders promise, you require a highly centralized state with the power to deprive people of equal political representation. You have to invest power in an incredibly centralized new ruling class that controls the resources of the country and redistributes them in a way this new ruling class sees fit. What happens time and time and time again, and has happened every single time socialism is tried on the scale in human history, is that new ruling class ends up being just as repressive, if not more repressive than the one they overthrew. They end up enriching themselves, as we have seen in Venezuela. It's textbook. Maduro and Chavez before him, these are drug traffickers, these are corrupt people who have enriched themselves, saying that they're doing this for the people, they're taking money from industries and businesses that were hoarding the wealth. No, now they're hoarding the wealth, and what it ends up doing is immiserating the country, and it ruins the economy and causes hyperinflation. So they're mad about many things. They're mad about the economic situation in the country and the political situation, but those things are tied together because that's how socialist governments perform.
I would say that's an oversimplification of many different historical episodes. Can you point to one where a socialist government was democratically elected and then decided to end free elections?
We have Venezuela?
Hugo Chavez did not end democratic elections upon being
the independent election supervisors have long claimed that. Have long said
so
that
you don't
the
have any examples.
Government Venezuela is the example.
But Hugo Chavez did not do that upon becoming the leader of Venezuela. So
are you saying Hugo Chavez was democratically elected and there was nothing suspect about any of those elections?
Upon becoming leader, he did not end democratic elections. We also have to understand that a lot of these countries in Latin America were gaining independence from colonial rule. Cuba would be the prime example of this. And so, can you vote yourself out of colonial rule? No, they had to defeat Spain.
Does Cuba have democratic elections?
I'm sorry?
Does Cuba have democratic elections? They've been ruled by the same family for 70 years.
And this is where context is also important. So, the people of Cuba popularly wanted Fidel Castro to push out the United States because when the United States said, yeah, we're going to help Spain get out. Instead, when Spain retreated and was no longer the colonial ruler of Cuba, the United States tried to be the colonial ruler of Cuba, totally going back on their promise of, we want self-determination for you, we want democracy. They saw economic interests in having Cuba controlled by the United States, and so Fidel Castro became a popular figure because he pushed the United States out. And a lot of these countries, Nicaragua is another prime example where, yes, democratic socialists were elected to power, and what did the United States do? They couped the leadership. And so it's very difficult to gain control of your economy and your resources and then constantly be fighting U.S. intervention and the CIA.
You're trying to make me defend something I don't defend. I don't think these places should be colonies of the United States or should be run by the United States or other countries either. I don't support that. I'm not an imperialist. I'm not a neoconservative.
Right,
but I can point out that their own governance is also very bad, as many of the people there feel. They are right now taking to the streets to protest tyranny, and it's perfectly fine to say tyranny is bad. I'm not saying the U.S. should do anything about it. I don't think we should invade Venezuela or Cuba or anyone else. In fact, I think we should normalize trade relations with Cuba. I'm all for doing that. I'm all for normalizing trade relationships with Venezuela. I think the best thing we can do for the people of these countries is to have greater engagement with them on a voluntary commercial basis, not a militarized basis, not a war-making basis. At the same time, we can be able to call a spade, and leftist tyrannical thugs ruling having tin pot dictatorships is obviously what's going on.
So you can criticize Hugo Chavez and similar actors who wanted self-determination for Venezuela. But upon being released from prison in 1994, he did receive a majority of the votes and was democratically elected. He did not end democratic rule upon rising to power. That is how he stayed in power. And that's how he earned 56.2% of the vote, was elected, and then reelected in 2000 with 59.8% of the vote, and again in 2006 with 62.8% of the vote. So it's dishonest to point out that some leaders, upon gaining independence from colonial rule, No, they weren't democratically elected because there was no government before that. And it's difficult to hold elections in a lot of these cases. But upon establishing a new governmental structure, they can establish the systems necessary to hold elections. And that's what we saw in the Congo again with Patrice Lumumba, who fought for independence in the Congo and from Belgium. And Belgium and the United States leveraged to try and control the Katanga region, which is where a lot of the rubber was. That's where a lot of the rubber used to make U.S. tires was coming from. And so the U.S., of course, didn't want Lumumba to become the leader, because he promised that the workers in the Congo would no longer be slaves of Belgian rule, and they would no longer be extracting their resources. And then he was democratically elected and was assassinated by the CIA, which they've taken credit for. So it's a complicated thing to say that socialism has failed where it was ever tried when the largest military power in the world has intentionally made sure that every socialist leader was overthrown.
I don't think we should overthrow leaders of other countries. I'm against interventionism. I think a lot of U.S. foreign policy has been very, very bad. But I don't think the considerable drawbacks in most genuinely socialist countries. Again, social democracy is fine, but actual socialism where a central committee runs the country usually ends up being horribly repressive, like the Soviet Union or Pol Pot or North Korea. You want a textbook socialist country? It's North Korea. Doesn't want to engage in trade, doesn't involve itself in the international community, has no political rights, and is a weird cult of personality around a single family. They say their ideology is socialism. It is socialism. It is command and control by a single ruling family. It's indistinguishable from monarchy at some point. That's how socialism seems to go. You can certainly have a country that's a social democracy, that is democratic, that has a more generous welfare state and has more strict regulation of businesses. This pertains to many European countries, for example. I wouldn't call their ruling ideology socialism, it's social democracy. There's a difference between the two things.
I think it's easy to say, yes, overthrowing governments is bad, but
it is easy.
What you said was Hugo Chavez was not democratically elected. His rise to power wasn't democratic. And,
it was a coup, and then he was democratically elected, and then
right.
he had the Constitution rewritten so that he could remain in power forever.
And so
there was a significant.
Right, and so we have to understand.
I'm not an expert in the history of the constitutional crisis in Venezuela in the aughts, but many people at the time did think he was making anti-democratic moves to stay in power by doing that referendum to extend his power past 10 years and all of that. I mean,
and I already
he rewrote the system of government so that he could stay in power past the term limits. You say, okay, well, he was democratically.
I already spoke to that, Robbie, and I think when I say, well, it's dishonest to point out that Hugo Chavez or any leader was not democratically elected when what they had to do was take their country back from external rule, that's a dishonest thing to point out and say, well, that's why socialism is bad. And you're right to point out that an economic system and a political system are different. You can have an economy where the people own the means of production, which is what socialism is. And you can have an authoritarian political system. You can also have a democratic one. That's about how you appoint leaders and decision makers. There are a lot of examples of socialism where it can happen at a hyper-local level, where people are voting where to allocate manpower and resources and labor power. And the United States, because it's controlled by people who own multinational corporations, have money invested in them, and have capital that depends on those multinational corporations controlling resources in foreign countries, that's why we've seen the United States take a vested interest in overthrowing these governments and quashing any idea that socialism is good, because their lifestyle depends on people believing it's bad.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. More Rising right after this.
This just in, Russia has agreed to free Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, a former U.S. Marine. U.S. officials told ABC News that it will be a prisoner swap in a multi-part deal. Reports are saying that the swap could involve as many as 30 prisoners. The two wrongfully detained men have been languishing in prison. Gershkovich was arrested in March of 2023 for espionage, a charge he and U.S. officials flatly denied. There was a hasty trial held behind closed doors last month where he was sentenced to 16 years in a high-security penal colony. Whelan has been detained since 2018. He holds British, Irish, and Canadian citizenship alongside his American one. He was officially convicted in June of 2020 and also sentenced to 16 years.
Candidate Donald Trump had this to say earlier about the release of the two Americans.
Evan Gershkovich, the reporter for the Wall Street Journal who is being held by Russia, will be released almost immediately after the election, but definitely before I assume office. He will be home, he will be safe. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, will do that for me, and I don't believe he'll do it for anyone else, and we will be paying nothing. Biden likes to pay massive numbers. We will be paying nothing. Thank you very much.
So this is great news that Evan and Paul will be released. Paul's been held much longer than Evan, actually. It's unjust that they were detained. They're not spies. There's no evidence been presented to the contrary. This was just a obvious violation of journalistic press freedom, and so I'm glad they're going to be released. It's good news.
Yes, this is very good news. It's good news for journalists. It's always sad when journalists are detained.
It's sad when anyone's detained unjustly. It's not. I never want to be just doing industry solidarity. Like, oh no, it's so much worse because they're a journalist. It's no American should be wrongfully detained. But
I heard you say no one should be wrongfully detained. Robbie's a prison abolitionist.
Well, no one should be. Well, no one should be wrongfully detained. If you commit crimes, you should be detained. They didn't commit any crimes.
I think that. Yeah, I think that journalists being detained and journalists being persecuted in wars is especially egregious. I mean, we're seeing this in Gaza right now. We saw an Al Jazeera journalist hit by a missile and was decapitated. I think it matters a little bit more when journalists are targeted. You have a lot of people that are targeted for various reasons, but journalists are responsible for criticizing the government, and when they're detained by the government, it definitely is a problem because this is someone who communicates to the masses. The government's lack of integrity, the government's corruption, so targeting them is almost quelling, discontent with the government. That seems like you wouldn't like that as a libertarian, Robbie.
Certainly,
right.
I do not like it. For the most part, journalism is not a very dangerous job, so I never want to, overly portray our field as like. So there's a lot of industry solidarity. There's a lot of, oh, you're so heroes for doing it. Most journalism is very safe. In the list of like the top most dangerous jobs, it's working factory work. It's doing those kind of working class jobs are what are dangerous. The category of journalism that is actually dangerous is doing foreign reporting in hostile countries like in Russia. So what Evan does specifically is somewhat more dangerous, and he was detained for a period of time over it. So very good that he is being freed. I don't know what Trump was saying there about it's not going to happen until he's elected. We understand that the prison swap has been agreed to, is what has been reported. Now I assume that does mean giving up. We might be freeing people, or our allies freeing people that Russia wants freed, who some people argue that, we shouldn't negotiate with outlaw regimes and we shouldn't free people that we've correctly detained in order to free our people over there. It ends up, being this whole argument, that kind of thing. But I'm of the view that we should try to recover our people, basically, no matter what.
Yeah, I think that now that we have this prison swap, this is a good example of actually how journalism is a little bit dangerous these days, because we don't have people actually reporting on who these prisoners were that are detained from Russia. We always have a huge media storm when U.S. journalists are detained in Russia or when Russian police roughs up protesters. We don't really get that in the United States as much. Why? Because I think a lot of journalists have been afraid not to pursue those stories. It is true that reporting in conflict zones is incredibly dangerous. We've seen that in Israel's attack on journalists just these past 10 months. Not even the past year, we've seen so many journalists killed. And there are jobs that, people use their bodies. Construction's a dangerous job, mining, dangerous jobs as well, in a different way. I don't think we see as many standard office jobs in the finance industry or the law industry with people targeting them for their political views. I've had my apartment broken into. I think that it does have a heightened sense of, security concerns compared to standard work where you're not doing physical labor. And I think with the amount of journalists that are targeted in times of war, that is very scary. And foreign correspondents, it is very scary to see journalists attacked by foreign governments. And I would like to see more journalists report on who the prisoners were that we had, that we're swapping for Gershkovich and Whelan, and why did we detain them? Because there's a lot of hypocrisy around the U.S. dealings with Russia, which we've covered on the show.
Yes, and there's a lot of hypocrisy around how the U.S. talks about freedom of the press. At the same time, they were trying to imprison, convict, kill Julian Assange for years, someone who is a journalist who engaged in an act of journalism in revealing information the government did not want you to have, and then who was forced to hide in an embassy, then was actually jailed in Britain, and that the U.S. government spent years trying to, furthering this ridiculous prosecution of him. Now, thankfully, that has finally, just as we reported, has been widely reported in the last month or so, came to an end, where Julian is now free in his native Australia. But that was so the U.S. has finally corrected that grave injustice of pursuing this man for engaging in journalism. But we should not. The U.S. likes to portray other regimes as hostile to to free speech, to the First Amendment, to press freedom, while we have this sterling record, which is just not at all the case. At the same time, it is perfectly fair to say that nations such as Russia have a even worse track record and have jailed journalists and criminalized dissent and have wrongfully imprisoned our journalists like Evan Gershkovich.
Yeah, the total figure now is 113 journalists that have been killed in the war in Gaza. I just wanted to say that figure since we're talking about it. But yeah, I think it's the weird thing that I want to get into is that Donald Trump gave this speech saying he's going to be released after the election, almost giving a sense that if you vote for me and I win, it's going to happen right after the election. We're going to pay nothing for it. I'm not going to pay anything for it. Russia would only do this for me. He's not the one who negotiated this deal, and he's taking credit for it, it seems. He did mention that it will happen before the official inauguration, as if to add some truth to the matter, which he's already misled.
I mean, for all I know, he does have a better relationship with Vladimir Putin than Joe Biden does.
But he's not the one who got this deal done. And he really tried to take credit for it in that video, saying it's going to happen after the election. The only people they would do this with is me. I think it just speaks to how much the Trump camp is struggling, honestly, to see him try and take credit for something that happened under a different administration. Just say it's good. Say that you support journalism, you support free press. That's why you're at that event today. There's a lot of different ways he could have handled that other than saying it's going to happen right after the election and making it seem like this is all because him and Putin are besties.
I mean, but what's wrong with that? I mean, Joe Biden has had this incredibly combative relationship with Russia, arming Ukraine forever. We would argue having potentially extended and expanded the war instead of seeking a peace agreement. We are waging a proxy war with Russia under the Biden administration. It's perfectly plausible to me that Donald Trump would have charted a different course that does not involve the complete destruction of Ukraine and maybe gets our people back earlier, or not. I don't know, but we might find out in November what it would look like under Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think Putin and Trump are going to have some issues over Trump's stance on Israel, vowing to support Israel, saying Israel needs to finish the job. When you have Russia,
that's no different than Joe Biden. Joe Biden is supporting
the Yemeni Houthi
Israel.
rebels, so they're on opposite sides of a proxy war in Israel. Well, there's one going on in Ukraine that Donald Trump seems to want to pull out of. I don't think we're going to see Donald Trump and Putin be besties if he keeps his position on Israel.
I mean, it's the same. Trump and Biden have the same, as far as I can tell, Israel position. Donald Trump certainly hasn't explained what he would do differently in Israel than what the current administration is doing. They do have maybe a different Ukraine policy. We'll see. So I don't know that he's any different from.
Donald Trump agrees with that, Robbie. Donald Trump has called Biden a bad Palestinian, says that the Democrats are bad for the Jewish community in Israel. Yeah. He said that he would be much tougher on Israel than Biden and the Democrats are and have been.
More lenient,
Donald Trump.
Tougher on Gaza.
Yes, tougher on Gaza. Yes, he would be arming Israel and make Israel more of a military might and have them finish the job, which is very different from Biden saying we need to show restraint and calling for a ceasefire.
You can read finish the job multiple ways. You can read it as that was.
Oh, he wants a ceasefire.
Yeah, finish it in terms of have no more conflict.
No, that is not what Donald Trump means when he says finish the
I mean,
job.
I think he's
that
literally
is not why
leaving it
he's calling
ambiguous,
Biden
but-
a Palestinian and framing Biden as weak on Israel.
Yeah. All right, we will continue to discuss that. More Rising right after this. Only a few punches were thrown in yesterday's opening Olympic match between Algerian boxer Iman Khalif and Italian boxer Angela Carini before Carini dropped out, which is a rare occurrence in boxing. Now, the entire match lasted 46 seconds. Many are raising their eyebrows at the Algerian boxer Iman Khalif. Khalif was disqualified during the 2023 World Championships and sanctioned by the International Boxing Association for failing to meet gender standards because of high levels of testosterone. The president of the IBA said at the time, quote, based on DNA tests, we identified a number of athletes who tried to trick their colleagues into posing as women. According to the results of the test, it was proved that they have XY chromosomes. Such athletes were thus excluded from competition. But the International Olympic Committee cleared Khalif to compete anyway in the game, saying, quote, everyone competing in the women's category is complying with the competition eligibility rules. They are women on their passports, and it stated that this is the case, that they are female. Now, after the match, the Italian athlete said, quote, I felt a severe pain in my nose, and with the maturity of the boxer, I said, enough. Carini then said, quote, I am not here to pass judgment or pass judgment if an athlete is this way, and in that sense, it's not up to me to decide. The Italian Premier Giorgia Meloni criticized the match, saying that she opposes allowing female athletes to compete against athletes with, quote, genetically male characteristics. Khalif fights again on Saturday. There's also one more athlete, Lin Yu-ting of Taiwan, who similarly failed a gender eligibility requirement and was stripped of a bronze medal last year. She will compete in her first match tomorrow.
Now, many conservatives online were furious with the results of the match. Outkick founder Clay Travis tweeted, quote, every Democrat leader says this is perfectly fine. The man is a woman. It's way past time for choosing on this issue. Now, Olympic medalist Sharon Davies tweeted, quote, the IOC are negligent in their duty to care to female boxers, knowingly putting males with a huge advantage in the ring with females.
And these were hardly the only people to speak of. My social media feed right now is nothing but outraged. Many of them conservatives, others as well. J.K. Rowling, who obviously the Harry Potter author, has been very outspoken on issue of trans people in women's spaces, said, could any picture, has a picture of the two boxers. Could any picture sum up our new men's rights movement better? The smirk of a male who knows he's protected by a misogynist sporting establishment, enjoying the distress of a woman he's just punched in the head and whose life ambition he's just shattered. Hashtag Paris 2024. A lot of commentary from people on the right noting that this is a man, describing this as a man beating up a woman and for sport, which is very despicable, detestable. I will say, so this person, this athlete, does not identify as trans, just identifies as a woman.
Right.
In Algeria, it is illegal to transition, I understand. Now, this person failed prior tests to determine what I think they're best described as an intersex person, probably, for having high levels of testosterone, certain genetically male characteristics that many people would probably say, argue that they should not be competing against women who don't possess the same biological characteristics, would seem to be most fair.
Right. Now, the IOC does provide a framework to international federations, but it's non-binding. So they didn't do any testosterone tests. We know that much. They said they did biochemical tests. And we know that neither of these athletes identify as transgender. I think it's a very interesting scenario where you have had a lot of conservatives argue that athletes need to compete with their gender assigned at birth. There are situations where people are born intersex and they are not transgender and they are assigned a sex at birth that is the closest to how their body developed. And I think that exposes some cracks in this argument that you have to compete with the gender assigned at birth. And it does give some credit to the people who are saying the best way to determine fairness in terms of sports and the advantages you have that are gender-based are tests of testosterone, are tests of hormones and testosterone present in the body. It seems to be much more clear-cut given that.
Well, right, but this person previously failed those tests.
Right, that's true. And I think that it would be much better if we had consistent testing for all athletes of testosterone if we're going to have a scenario where people are competing, we have transgender athletes, that has been determined. 2 years of HRT in many cases is what equalizes the playing field. And testing the testosterone levels is important as well to ensure that it's working and it's consistent, because there are always outliers. And for some, sometimes you're still faster. They've done tests of track and field sprinting after 2 years. And so for some sports, it could be 3 years. But really, understanding that biology is more complicated than we just have a gender assigned at birth and we are that gender.
I mean, in 99% of cases, it's not more complicated, but there are certainly outlier cases where it is more complicated. Yes.
And it seems like we have 2 outlier cases here that are good examples for why these standards need to be fleshed out, and that it's not so clear cut. And when we start assessing gender in this way, this probably wouldn't have been as much of a conversation or a question if we didn't have the huge debate around transgender athletes, because they're women on their passports, they have the same gender they were assigned at birth. Why were they even being tested or questioned? I don't know that this would have happened 10, 20 years ago.
Because it's in elite physical competition spaces. Look, you can be a woman for your passport. I'm not trying to take that away from anyone. I'm not trying to invalidate anyone's self-identification. Identify however you want. I support and affirm you. I don't care at all, even in the slightest little bit.
That's nice.
I want the same protections and treatment. We're talking about a specific aspect of human socialization, of competitive sports, where the differences between men and women are significant. In most ways, like our legal system does not in most ways recognize differences between men and women, as they should not. But there are some ways in which men and women are different, and in terms of competitive physical ability, that is one of them.
Yeah.
And so you have to separate men and women in sports, even from a young age, if you want it to be competitive at some point. And now we're getting to, you're right, a tricky situation where this person did not transition, so they're not under the transgender category. However, they do have a natural biological advantage in terms of higher testosterone levels that should probably mean that they're not competing against biological women. And maybe that's just like in your case, you don't do that, or you're with other people of similarly advanced testosterone levels or something like that. It's a difficult situation, but it just seems very clear to me that this person should not have been in this match.
Yeah, we want fights to be fair, and except in the case of Maduro and Elon Musk, but we want generally fights to be fair physically. We want athletes. It's not a real competition if one person's much stronger than the other person, and I think that I'm curious to know what biochemical tests they completed to determine this.
I mean, for boxing, they even do
testosterone.
They even do You're in a weight class, and additionally, in boxing, it's not just like let's just set aside the women's issue. Let's just say men's boxing, men boxing each other. It's not like any man goes up against any other man. There's like very strict criteria for you're in this weight category against some boxers want to lose weight, want to slim down so they can fit into they can be the heaviest person in exactly this narrower weight class to fight. So it's like my point being, it's very carefully litigated who you are allowed to compete against in boxing as a sport. And so I would think that would preempt inclusion of this person, and I understand why everyone was so upset about it.
Right. Yeah. And Adams, who is the IOC spokesman, spoke to this and said, testosterone is, in reference to the testosterone test, it's not perfect. Many women can have high testosterone, even an amount that would be called male levels. Similarly, males can have low testosterone, similar to women's levels, but they can still be women with high testosterone and compete as women. So the idea that you test and you do one for testosterone and you're not considered a woman anymore, he's really questioning that people are calling these women transgender when he says this was not a transgender issue. There's been some misreporting on that in the press. And so I think this is gonna really rock conservatives' minds, hopefully J.K. Rowling's, about what it means biologically to be a woman, because sometimes a woman has high testosterone. How do we grapple with that? So very interesting. I hope there's some reflection there, but I'm not sure that it will be. I think something like this is going to be taken as just more fuel to the political fire on the transgender issue.
That does it for us today on Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure being with you all this week. That does it for us. Tomorrow is Rising Fridays, and I actually have no idea what's happening today, but tomorrow, presumably someone, Amber and someone else. Is it you, Jessica?
Nomiki Khan is coming up.
Is that who it is?
And our producer will correct me if I'm wrong, but yes.
Okay.
Former TYT host. Yes, Nomiki Khan. She is someone who ran for public office. She's kind of a known progressive media figure.
Cool.
And I think I'm excited to see her do the show with Amber.
All right, we'll try that out.
So be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss that or any content. And for those of you who like to listen while you're on the go, we are available wherever you get your podcasts.
And Jessica and I will be back next week. See you then.
See you Monday. Bye, y'all.